This is the J. Scott Outdoors podcast on Western big game hunting and fishing, brought to you by GoHunt.com Insider. Research faster, hunt more. Go to GoHunt.com/insider and join today. I'm your host, Jay Scott, and I live and breathe hunting and fishing, spending half the year in the field experiencing God's creation. I hope you'll enjoy hearing about our adventures. Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors Western Big Game Hunting and Fishing podcast. Today we have a great show. We have a fellow Coues deer fanatic, Tim Maddock, and Tim and I are going to dive into all of the aspects of hunting desert ranches compared to mountain ranches for Coues deer. And we're going to go over my observations and Tim's observations. Tim has been able to run a bunch of trail cameras the last several years down on desert ranches and gather a lot of intel and data about deer movements and what have you. So it's going to be a great episode. But before we get into that, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about our ratings and reviews on iTunes. Really appreciate everyone that has left a 5-star rating and left comments, positive comments on the review section. I want to go over a few of these reviews. We've got AZ Stumpy, best podcast ever. Thanks, Jay. Awesome by Wu-Tang Fan. Very informative and well done podcast and very interesting guests. Love how you really go into detail about the gear and hunts. Keep it up. Superior by Spacey Jr. Jay Scott's podcast is the best there is. Very informational and current with hot topics in hunting and fishing industry. If you want the inside scoop from the best outfitters in the West, you should simply not miss these podcasts. Can't wait for the next episode, Jay. Thanks. Number 1 Hunting and Fishing Podcast by Siamber. Jay and his guests have a wealth of knowledge. Every episode I learn something that I can take into the field. I love the gear section, hearing what you guys use and why you use them. This is a great resource. Can't say enough about this podcast. Jay, please get Randy Ulmer on your show. I would love to hear how the guy gets it done on monster muleys. Well, it's funny you say that. Randy is going to be on the podcast, and I'm looking forward to his episode. Let's see. Love the podcast. Please keep them going by SBCF15. Joe BC3 writes, keep them coming. Love it. JD112H, incredible information. Nice to hear a podcast focused on Western big game hunting. Great local info. That guy 33BLK says, love the show. Keep it coming. JB2012, great information. Lots of great tips for guys looking to start hunting big game in the West. I look forward to each episode. Anyway, guys, you get the point. There's a lot of great reviews, and I appreciate all of the comments and all of the ratings and reviews from you guys. That helps our standings with iTunes. I want to encourage you guys to follow along on our YouTube channel at J. Scott Outdoors, on our Facebook page, J. Scott Outdoors, on my Instagram, which is at J. Scott Outdoors. You can also follow my associate Dar Colburn at DARRCOLBURN. Thank you for following along. Thank you for supporting us. And let's get right into the episode here with Tim Maddock, and let's talk some Coues deer. Welcome to the J. Scott Outdoors podcast. Today we have Tim Maddock from Prescott, Arizona. Tim is a stucco contractor by trade, and he's a fellow Coues deer hunter and Coues deer fanatic, and first met Tim actually through CouesWhitetail.com, and he's a contributor on there, and has some real good topics for conversation, and is usually a real nice, pleasant contributor on that website, and I always enjoy hearing what he has to say. And he's been going down to Sonora, Mexico for 9 years, hunting Coues deer, and I've been going down since the late 90s. Dar and I just love it down there, and so it's always nice to talk to Tim about his experiences and the things that he's been seeing down there, and he's hunted, good ranches and bad ranches, and there's really no bad ranch, but maybe deer that are not as plentiful, and maybe the racks aren't very big for one reason or another. And then he's hunted ranches that are good, have pretty good deer concentrations, and with pretty good bucks. He's hunted both the desert and the mountain ranches, as have I, and we're going to talk today a little bit about the differences of mountain ranches compared to desert ranches, and then get into moon phase a little bit and just some of his observations. And it should be a really good conversation in regards to Coues deer and their habits and such. Tim, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Jay.
Yeah, I think this will be a fun conversation. I know it's something about every year we have back and forth. So I figured it would make actually a great podcast episode here. So great to have you. Tim, why don't you give me a little bit of a background on yourself and your hunting background and what have you, and then we'll dive into this.
Well, Jay, like you said, I'm a stucco contractor up here in Prescott, Arizona. I've been living here for about 8 years now. I've been hunting since I was a teenager. I didn't grow up in a hunting family. My dad was more of an outdoorsman, camper, hiker, backpacker, but really didn't get too much into hunting. Wasn't against it, but just that wasn't his thing. As an adult, I associated with some people that hunted, or as a young adult rather, and it just really piqued my interest. And as I grew old enough to be able to drive myself to some of these places and go hunting, I just connected with good friends and good buddies that had the similar interests as I did. And just over the years, I've kind of focused more and more on Coues deer. That's always been sort of my favorite thing. People talk about elk being their favorite or mule deer being the favorite. I am just a diehard Coues deer hunter.
Well, that's awesome. We have a lot in common in that regards. My wife would always argue that I'm a diehard whatever season it is at the time, but certainly Coues deer have a special place in my heart.
Sure.
Tim, you tell me a little bit about your first experiences going down to Mexico, as far as some of the different ranches that you've hunted and terrain and whatnot, and maybe some of the differences that you've witnessed over the years.
Sure. My first experience about 9 years ago, I went down on a fully guided outfitted hunt with Dan Bishop, who I think you know, Cola Blanca Outfitters.
Yeah. Great guy.
Great guy. Turned out to be a friend. I've used him as a taxidermist and actually hunted it with him for 3 consecutive years there in the very beginning of all this. The very first day, the very first morning out on a brand new ranch that not even Dan had ever hunted, I went out with one of his guides, and we glassed up a good deer, and we called Dan over to take a look at it, and it was the first deer I glassed up that day, and it was a buck. And this buck we knew was nice, but it wasn't until he stepped out into the sun and got the light shining off of him, and he was what we think was probably a 105 inch mainframe deer, and had a big old 12-inch long wraparound double main beam on him. And that all occurred within the first, half hour, 45 minutes of hunting, my first experience in Mexico. And Dan got behind the binos and just looked at the deer and said, "You need to shoot that buck right away." And I never did shoot him. He walked over the hill and never saw that buck again. But that's kind of what got me going in Mexico. I hunted an additional 2 more years with Dan. And other various outfitters after that, but finally got to doing my own thing, and it's just hooked me ever since.
Right on. And the terrain that you've hunted mainly on the mountain ranches, compare that a little bit with the desert ranches as far as the vegetation and whatnot.
Well, first of all, the mountain ranches and the desert ranches are, to me, night and day. Obviously, one is mountains and one is more flat desert floor type of country. Mountain ranches tend to, be tough hikes in the morning, getting up into vantage points, going on big, ridges and looking across to another mountainside, long distances. Generally speaking, you can glass from one spot for, hours on end. Sometimes it's thick brush, sometimes, but a lot of times it's also more of the oak trees and ocotillos and more open country. But in the desert, you're down in the thick, brushy catclaw. Buffalo grass is real common in the area that we hunt. The deer live on the desert floor more so than they do up on the ridges in the mountainsides. So it's night and day in terms of the terrain and the country. The deer are still the same, but I think they tend to behave a little differently as well.
Yeah, I usually notice that on the mountain ranches you tend to see more deer.
Absolutely.
On the mountain ranches in the Mesquite and Ocotillo country, it seems as though that's where the most deer are. Then you've got the oaks. Some years maybe you'll have a bunch of deer in the oaks if there's acorns, but for me, looking at mountain ranches, the high oak ranches sometimes don't have the numbers of deer that, say, the Mesquite, Ocotillo mountain ranches have. But then you contrast that with the desert ranches. And when I'm talking about desert ranches, around in the general vicinity of Hermosillo, where you've basically got same contour and same elevation. You've got desert flats with a few, mountain peaks here and there. But it seems as though on those desert ranches, the deer actually, even though there may be a hill or even a mountain for that matter, they actually still live in the desert floor.
Right.
Whereas on mountain ranches, they seem to be kind of found all over.
Right.
I think in general, the best Coues deer habitat for numbers of deer seems to be Ocotillo and Mesquite to me, and I think that holds true in Arizona as well for numbers.
I agree.
We're going to talk a little bit about moon phase and talk about maybe some vegetation and such. I always say, oh, that buck's a pretty good buck for a mountain ranch. And people say, well, what do you mean? And, granted, there are big giant bucks that get killed on mountain ranches, but in my opinion, there are bigger bucks down on the desert floor, down on the desert ranches. So you ask the question, is the vegetation better, or the minerals in the soil, or the genetics, or something better that makes the desert deer on the desert ranches bigger? Well, I don't exactly have it all figured out. I have my speculations, and we're certainly going to get into that. But, sometimes on these mountain ranches, 105-inch deer, that's as big as that deer's ever going to be in its lifespan, and I feel like sometimes bucks maybe not even reach 100 inches ever as a fully mature deer.
Right.
Whereas it seems on the desert, you get a buck with age, he's going to be a pretty big buck. Now, granted, a lot of desert ranches you don't see near as many deer.
Right.
So, and that it could be a function of not seeing as many deer, and so the bucks don't have near as much competition fighting with each other and what have you. I don't exactly know why. My biggest buck that I've ever shot Coues deer hunting actually came off of a desert ranch, came off of the desert floor down by Hermosillo. It was, I think, 133 and 6/8 gross, 131 and something, or 130 and 6/8 net or something like that. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful big buck with a couple of extra points and what have you.
Yep.
But, ironically, the biggest Coues deer I've ever been around was actually a mountain deer that was shot by my friend Glenn Hall, I believe, in like 2000. I'm not sure, that maybe 99 or 2000. Seems like when you get back that far, all those years blend together. But it was 143 and 5/8, and it was definitely a mountain ranch. And, so you can't always say that the biggest deer come out of the desert. But I will say, deer for deer, number for number, the percentage-wise, it just seems the bucks in the desert are bigger. What do you think about that, Tim?
Jay, that's exactly my observation. There's big bucks all over Sonora, Mexico, and what the reasoning behind is, it we may never know, and we could argue it. But I tend to agree that for the most part on the mountain ranches, you're going to see a lot more deer. I can remember days of seeing 60 or 100 deer in a single, morning glassing session. Literally, that many deer we counted. And then on these desert ranches that we're hunting, there's mornings where we see 6 or 10 deer or 2 deer, or you go a day or two and you don't even see a shooter type of mature buck. But for the most part, I think that genetically the desert areas tend to put out genetics that are just a heavy, massive deer. Oftentimes they throw a lot of non-typical points, and I think, deer for deer, I'd put my money on seeing more big bucks on a desert ranch than a mountain ranch any day.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. When I killed my biggest deer down on the desert, there were days I would go and not even see a Coues deer.
Yeah.
And so, it's definitely a different style of hunting. The mountain ranch is a target-rich environment, and, you're glassing and picking up quite a few deer, even during the middle of the day. The desert takes a whole different level of patience, and it's both are fun in their own right. Why don't you tell me a little bit about your findings this year and how you approached the hunt and your strategy? And I know you ran some trail cameras, and why don't you fill me in on that?
Sure. This year was our second year hunting this particular ranch, and we added, actually kind of probably nearly doubled the size of the ranch, by adding the ranch next door. So some of it was new country to us that we had never hunted before, and then some of it was country that we had hunted the year previous. But truth is, there's so much of it, it's hard to cover it all in that short amount of time. Anyway, we could spend years and still not cover everything. We've got probably, 80, 90 square miles of ranch down there all to ourselves. Our focus going into it the first year was to set out some trail cameras and kind of get an inventory of where the bucks were, where the deer were, where the bucks were, where they're moving to and from, bedding and feeding, and where they're watering at, what times they're watering, and hopefully in the process get a few good deer on camera that we could focus our efforts on. And for the most part, we were successful. The first year we killed 5 deer, all of which were over 100 inches, except for one. A bow hunter killed about an 85-inch deer. It was the first Coues deer he'd ever shot, and he shot it with a bow, so we're happy for him on that. We killed a 115-inch buck, a 117-inch buck, a 111-inch double drop time deer, and I think a small 103, 104-inch deer. So we had a lot of success, and some of it was just blind luck, but we started to find out that these trail cameras really was giving us a lot of good feedback, a lot of good information. We learned that the deer preferred to hit the dirt tanks over the cement or metal troughs. We learned that, or maybe reconfirmed the idea that the Coues deer like to water during the middle of the day. In the hours between 9 and 1 o'clock in the afternoon is prime time for hunting Coues deer, especially if you wanted to sit water. We learned a little bit about the rutting schedule of the deer down there, that they tend to move a lot earlier in the season, end of December, beginning of January, and then it almost seems as if they they go into a lockdown period where you don't see them at the water holes or on the trail cameras as much, but those times you want to be more glassing out in the hills and looking for rutting deer that maybe aren't going to water as regularly. So we took all that information that we gathered in the first year, and we expanded upon it for year number 2. And instead of running 15 or 18 trail cameras, we upped it to over 50 trail cameras. And every water source that we could set a camera on, we did. And some of these dirt tanks that we knew from the previous year had a lot of deer, or some good deer on them, we'd set 5 or 6 trail cameras on these bigger dirt tanks and try to get as much of the activity as we could. And we had literally thousands and thousands of pictures, and every day, every free minute of the day, we spent sorting through trail camera pictures. And we just learned their patterns, and we learned their behavior, and we still killed some good deer this year. We killed 115, 110 with a bow. We killed some 100 plus inch deer. But they were deer that we were after. They were deer that we knew about from either the year before or from trail camera pictures this year, and we were able to just focus our attention on those specific deer and allow other deer that may not have been fully mature or may not have just been quite what we wanted in terms of antler size. We were able to let them walk, knowing that there's a great buck that might be using this ridge or draw or hillside. So we take that information that we gained from the trail cameras, and we put it to use.
Tim, would you say that the majority of the deer that you killed both years, how many of those were sitting water and waiting for the deer to come, and how many of them were actively out glassing and glassing them up?
It's about half and half, I would say, and it just depends on the hunter's, preference. Some guys absolutely cannot sit in a ground blind when it's hot out and do it for hours on end. And if that's the case, that's fine. We have areas that we'll go glass, and we have a lot of success there as well. And then there's times where glassing might be the most effective way, or if the big buck that I killed this year, he didn't hit a water hole regularly. There were several in the area, and he'd bounce back and forth, and so there really wasn't a pattern. And then when he'd go rut, you just didn't know where he was going to water. So the best technique for him was to glass, and we glassed him up, and I was able to shoot him about 200 yards. And but it comes down to about half and half. But really, it just depends on what style or what mode of hunting you want to do.
Sure. And what did you notice when you said the dirt tanks versus the metal tanks? Did you notice that the deer came in morning, daylight, and dark, and the metal tanks, they strictly only came in during the day? Were you able to draw any correlation in that regard? And I guess what was your theory on why they didn't come to the windmills and the concrete drinkers and such or metal tanks as much as the dirt tanks?
Okay. I guess the deer, this is a total guess, Jay, but I'm going to say something to the effect of 2/3 to maybe 3/4 of the deer will come in during that 8, 9 o'clock in the morning until 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Based on the trail cameras and based on our observations of sitting the tanks, a lot of deer come in that time frame.
Does and bucks evenly? No discrepancy between the two, or that's just when the deer water? I mean, we think the same thing. Between like 9 and 1 o'clock is when most all deer water.
Yeah, and I would say that before the rut, we set the cameras at we go up Thanksgiving weekend. So between Thanksgiving and Christmas, most of the bucks are going to water at night and be somewhat nocturnal. That's not set in stone, but our experiences for the most part in that time frame, they're going to be pretty nocturnal.
And we're getting ahead of ourselves, but when you say nocturnal, if you had to pinpoint a 3-hour window, is it just after dark? Is it at 1 in the morning? When is the time once they are nocturnal? When did you see the biggest pattern?
I would say just after dark and just before light.
Okay.
Sometimes you get them in there at 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning, but it does vary. But I would say it's more, an hour or two after the sun goes down and an hour or two before the sun comes up.
Okay.
But
and back to the dirt tanks and the concrete drinkers, you were gonna, I think, tell us your hypothesis on why they drink at dirt tanks and not as much at the concrete.
And it's totally a hypothesis, Jay. I wish I could ask a deer someday and have them tell me why, but it seems like the water in a concrete or metal trough, that cool water that's clear and you can see to the bottom and isn't all muddied up and been, pounded with cows walking in it and defecating in it. You'd think that's the better water for them to drink, and that would be their choice. But I see more deer at the dirt tanks, the dirt repressos. I think that oftentimes the cover comes right up to the edge of the tank, and so the deer feels like there's cover there. One of the things that we've noticed is that the repressos are usually built in a wash, and you have a bermed up side and you have a mouth or an open side that's more like a beach, and that the cattle tend to congregate and stay on the open mouth side of the water tank. The deer oftentimes will come up over the berm through the brush and hit that side. I think to steer clear of the cattle, and I do believe that the deer and the cattle, they are occupying the same country at the same time. I don't believe that Coues just vacate a pasture because the cattle are there. I know a lot of guys believe different, but I've seen them too many times together, watering together, that type of thing. But the deer tend to give the right of way to the cows. But I think the deer like to be in a little bit more open area where they can see their surroundings and not have their head buried in a trough. The deer will come to the troughs, but I see them more at the repressos, at the dirt tanks, and I honestly don't know why.
And for the listeners, represso is what the Mexicans call dirt tanks, basically. They call them repressos, so that's the Spanish word.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's technically if it means tank or if it means water tank. I don't know exactly, but that's what we call them as well, repressos, when we're down there in Mexico. And then you noticed once the rut really starts, let's say January 5th for that, throughout the rest of January, they're in that lockdown period, but then they also start moving around again towards the end of January. Is that what you're saying?
That's sort of what we're seeing, Jay, from probably the 1st of January until sometime around the 10th, 12th, 15th of January. It seems like some of the bucks are very patternable, or they seem to be. It's not always as easy as it sounds, but they seem to come into the water sometimes 2 or 3 days in a row, and then they won't come for 2 or 3 days, and then they'll come back for 2 or 3 days. Sometimes they'll just come, every other day. But there's usually some, what you feel like is rhyme or reason to their pattern, and then all of a sudden, around the maybe 15th, 16th, 18th of the month, getting in closer to that third week, which I feel is sort of, when the rut really kicks in hard for the area that we're hunting, then all of a sudden it just becomes sporadic, and then I don't see as many of the bucks coming to the water for the purpose of water. I see or I feel that the bucks are coming to the water for the purpose of a social gathering area, basically to find does or to bird dog does, or they come in with their nose to the ground a lot of times, and they'll walk right past the edge of the water, and they won't ever even stop for a drink. They're just on the trail of a doe, and they'll just hightail right out of there and you don't see them again for a period of time.
Sure. What has been your impressions, observations, when you see rain on your camera and you see the raindrops and you know that it's rained? How many days does it usually take for the deer to show back up, or do you see them watering right away?
Well, it's hot down there. I mean, it's not abnormal for us to be hunting in 80-plus degree weather down there in January. And so if it rains, the puddles or whatever, they can be dried up within a matter of days, sometimes even hours. So to have deer come back relatively quickly to the water, it's not abnormal at all to see deer coming back within a day or two. What it can do though is fill up a nearby water tank that may have been dry, and now all of a sudden they're splitting time between those two tanks. So they're going back and forth, so that you may not get them on camera as much. But as far as little potholes of water and water in the bottom of the washes and stuff, they're sandy, so the water soaks into the ground and dries up fairly quickly.
Yeah, I know that the biggest buck I've shot in the desert, actually I was hunting that year with Dar and I were hunting with Randy Ulmer and his nephew Zach, and Randy and Zach actually had a picture of the buck that I killed in early November, and we didn't get any other pictures of him, I guess, at all. And when we got down there to hunt in January, actually the first week, the water tank where that buck had his picture taken was dry, and turns out the buck ended up moving over, a half mile away. There was another tank that actually had water, and he just switched over there, and we ended up moving some cameras, I guess, over there, and ironically, didn't know it till after I shot him, but I believe the night before I shot him, he was actually, they got photos of him on that tank, and it's just interesting to see how their different patterns change when, certain water tanks dry up, and it's a little bit of a fearful thing because, potentially if their water source dries up and there's not another one on your ranch, and let's say it might move them to another ranch, that's a little scary, and that's why it's always nice to have pretty big country down there.
Right. And it makes it nice though when it just moves them and concentrates deer around a different water hole that's on your ranch. Now you got twice as many deer congregating there, and it potentially can be a good thing in that scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was your how many lions? how many days did you have cameras out roughly, and how many lions did you get pictures of, and how many do you think were different lions?
We had cameras out basically from the end of November to the end of January, and I would say I would guess that there's a dozen different lions working the area. I mean, we get lions at 11 o'clock in the morning, so almost the middle of the day, coming into water. Nearly every tank at some point or another you find a lion track on. There's a lot of lions, and there's not a real good way to control them down there. There's no hunting season. Not all the cowboys have rifles or have a way to shoot them if they see them. Trappers and that type of thing is a possibility, but that gets expensive for the ranchers. So lions are a real concern, can be a problem down there.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of a catch-22, I think, for the owners of the property. On one hand, they want them to have rifles or .22 so they could shoot the lions, but they probably also know that their deer, whether they allow it or not, are going to get shot. And not all cowboys, but I mean, they got to eat too. And when the owner's not there, things happen. So
sure.
I think it's a hard thing for them, as much as they want the lions, because I'm sure they hammer their cattle too.
Sure.
They don't want to necessarily arm their cowboys to be able to chase lions. And quite honestly, they have different laws in Mexico who can have a firearm and who can't. So,
right.
But it's interesting, and people don't really realize how many lions there actually are until you run a string of cameras like you're talking about. Something that interests me in what you're saying, you're running 50 cameras. Are you running all the same kind of cameras?
No.
And have you found a particular camera and model that is your favorite as far as response time when the animal walks in and maybe quality of photo?
Jay, you're opening up a can of worms there you could make an entire podcast on. I don't run all the same.
Well, the good news is we don't have any sponsors, so we don't have to worry about making anybody mad. So you can go ahead and give me your observations.
I'll be entirely honest with you. I run different brands. I have some older stealth cams, some newer stealth cams. I have Moultries. The M880s are my favorite Moultrie. Great range on them, fast trigger time, great nighttime range on them, that is. My favorite camera line is the Browning line of cameras. For the money, the Browning BTC5, BTC6, you can get those on eBay for $119. Buy it now. They've got some of the older Brownings that are the BTC1, 2s, and 3s that oftentimes you can get under $100 on eBay. All of the Browning lines, for the most part, have a pretty fast trigger, under a second. They have different nighttime ranges from usually like 65 feet out to 100 feet, which is really a long ways at night for the flash. 100 feet is too far to really tell too much about a deer, but you are able to still take some inventory. If you know which big bucks are hitting a tank, you'll still recognize that far out which buck it is. So you're not going to be able to score it or see a lot of detail, but if you know that your big buck came in last night at 1 o'clock, well, maybe he's not going to come in today while you're sitting the blind, so you might want to come up with a different option. But the Brownings are really my favorites. Two quick stories. I had a problem with a stealth cam, a brand new stealth cam that I bought last year. It never took a single picture from day one. I called, and I'll just say that I did not have a good experience with the customer service. I was never able to resolve it. They were never able to, and they would not warranty the camera. I did have a couple.
Brand new camera and never worked.
Brand new camera. It took pictures, but all of the pictures came out black. It had the info strip at the bar at the bottom with the time and the date stamp on it. But the pictures just came out black, like you went into the closet and took a picture in blackness. No flash. It didn't matter if it was the daytime or nighttime. They were just black. I had an issue with a couple of Browning cameras. Not Browning's fault, but I had birds that actually pecked out the little plastic sensor, the motion sensor on them, and they pecked holes in them. And I called up Browning, and I told them what happened, and the lady was nice as could be, and she said, "Hey, let me send you an instructions on how to remove and replace these, and I'll send you more of the caps that the little strips that you can put in there." And she sent me extras in case it happens again on their dime. She didn't charge me a thing. It was fantastic. So from a customer service standpoint, I'm hooked on Browning cameras for sure.
Absolutely. That's great stuff. Great input there. Let's talk a little bit about your ideas on moon phase and what you notice from an observation standpoint on deer movement with moon phase, and then I'll chime in after I hear your observation.
Sure, and you and I have talked about this, Jay, and I think we believe, I think, a lot on the same lines here, but I know guys like to debate this till the end of time. I'm a huge proponent of hunting the new moon, and I just really feel when that new moon lines up with somewhere about the third week of January, you're in for a good time. I believe just with the nature of Coues deer to go to water during the middle of the day, and you get a new moon, sometimes even a full moon, the middle of the day can be a real active time. The whole theory behind the moon is essentially when the moon is on the rise, the deer are leaving their bedding and going out to the feeding areas, and when the moon is directly overhead or on going down, then the deer are leaving their feeding areas and going to the bedding areas. So your in theory, your best times to hunt deer or any game animal for that matter is when the moon is directly overhead or directly under your feet. And my experience, and I've looked on my little GPS where it has the different moon times, and today's going to be a good day, a great day, an average day, and it gives you those little 1 hour windows of when the deer ought to be moving. I have found it over and over and over again to be so true. It's just uncanny. I don't know. There's times where you may get a weather pattern or something that might shut things down, but if things are good, then I hunt the moon. I hunt it with Coues deer whenever I can. I will plan my next year's January trip to Mexico around the what I feel are the best moon days.
So looking into 2016, I believe the new moon is on the 10th and the full moon is on the 24th. And then at 2015, I believe the full moon, off memory, was around the 5th or 6th. And I think the dark moon, the new moon, was on the 20th. Tell me when, so you third week in January this year, that's when you had the new moon, and is that when you hunted and had the most success?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe we got into camp this January the 16th or 17th. I believe the new moon was approximately the 20th, 21st, and we were there until several days after the new moon. And without a doubt, the deer were rutting when we got there, and we knew they'd be rutting. But you followed the moon times, and more times than not, it's got some truth to it. That's all I can say. I don't know how to. I know there's a lot of unbelievers out there, but my experience is if I hunt the moon, then I tend to have more success.
So looking into 2016 and this year coming up with the dark moon, the new moon being the 10th of January, the question is going to be...
It's going to be tough.
Are the deer going to be rutting in time when it's the new moon, or will they be rutting finally once it's the full moon? And that's going to cause probably... for sitting for sure, I got to think it's going to be a little bit tough on that new moon this coming January.
I agree. I think it'll be a tougher year to plan around the moon, because the new moon doesn't fall this year in that third week. It falls on the second week, which can be hit or miss. And so it just presents a challenge for us to kind of see what's going to happen.
I think from a strictly mountain ranch spot and stock, honestly, I think having that dark moon, the new moon on the 10th, we're probably going to show up down there the 8th or 9th, maybe the 6th. 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th. We usually go on the 6th. And, my experience in glassing deer is, when it's a dark moon, you tend to see a lot more deer, in my opinion. But then, you also want to try and time it around when they'll be rutting. So I have a feeling the rut will probably be potentially a slow start. And then as the moon gets more, as the moon gets fuller, they'll just continue to, the rut will probably be in full swing by the 24th when it's full, the moon is full.
Right, and you may not see as much deer activity during the day, the morning and evenings. That would be a good time period, in my opinion, to be out all day on the 24th and the time frame around them, because when the moon is directly overhead or underfoot in the middle of the day, those deer ought to be up and moving.
Yeah, I mean, our experience is, and I have way more experience hunting mountain ranches than I do desert, but, you know, when it's a full moon, you might as well not, and we go anyway,
yeah.
But you might as well not even go the first 2-3 hours in the morning and the last 2 or 3 hours in the evening. And if you just sauntered out of camp about 9:30, 10, and glass from basically 10 to 2 on a full moon, I think you're going to see every bit as many deer as you would see what we call prime time, you know, the first 3 hours of the morning and the last 3 hours of the evening hunt. And Coues deer especially, it just seems like they're you know, that moon plays a huge role with them as far as their movement. And, you know, regardless of moon, we always notice that, you know, that 10 to 2 time frame, and that's most of the time why we glass all day, no matter what time of year it is for Coues deer. They seem to always get up and at least stand up, shake a little bit, and then lay back down when the shade changes, you know, anytime between that 10 and 2 period. You know, sometimes I say if I just had to go one period, it'd be that 10 to 2 because we've actually found some of the biggest bucks we've ever killed between that period.
Right, and in the scenario you're talking about where you have the full moon on and the, you know, the morning and the evening hunt doesn't tend to be good, those are days that on our desert ranches we would want to be in the blind without a doubt. That's a blind day. And chances are we'd do very well in a blind on a day like that. Just like you said, you would see tons of deer moving around in the middle of the day. Well, our deer in the middle of the day are going to be moving to and from the water hole. So that would be the option for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, it's hard to explain Mexico to a lot of people that you know, they call and they say, well, isn't it dangerous down there? And they say, you know, don't they have guns down there and there's bad people? And, you know, and my answer is, yeah, there probably is. Do I ever see them? No. And to think that I would miss a year of these deer that, you know, we love so much, I mean, to me, there's nothing like going in Mexico, going to a ranch, locking the gate, knowing you're the only people on the ranch. You know, you've got the whole ranch leased up.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can find deer, you can evaluate deer. If it's not the one you want, you can leave them, you know, come back 5 or 6 days later. And, okay, so you're, you know, if you got limited time, okay, I'm going to go ahead and go back and try and find that original deer. And, you know, it's just so refreshing. And, you know,
sure.
You know, there's some people that say, oh, yeah, it's, you know, it's private land and it's not real hunting and all that. It's, you know, and I argue it's actually more real hunting than public, in that you're actually getting to hunt the deer in their own behavioral patterns. They're not bouncing around and getting kicked up by other hunters and what have you. So, you know, I like to hunt public land too, but you know, there's something about hunting in Mexico where, you know, it's a fairly target-rich environment. Seems like there's a lot of bucks compared to, you know, you've got quite a few bucks. Even if you have a low-density place, you still have quite a few bucks to choose from.
That's a big
one. It's just hard to beat.
You can't beat it. We're spoiled, Jay, you and I are, because we get to hunt Mexico. Unfortunately, not everybody could, but it's definitely an experience that I think any dyed-in-the-wool Coues deer hunter ought to go and do at some point in their lifetime, even if it is only once. But it's not a canned hunt by any means. There's, like you said earlier in this, that there's good ranches and there's bad ranches. Some years are better than others, and you don't always find big deer. They're there. You know, we have on our ranches, you know, probably more big bucks that we didn't kill this year. We didn't kill the biggest bucks that we know of. they made it through the year. We tried, and we killed what we could, but the biggest bucks on our ranches that we are aware of survived, and we'll just know that we're going after them first next year. But
well, it's always nice to have something to look forward to going back, knowing a few bucks are there, and it's been our experience sometimes that Dar and I on these mountain ranches, we see a handful of bucks that we try and go back next year and kill, and some we do, and some we just never end up seeing again, and you wonder how many of them just got eaten by a lion or chased down by a coyote, or I think if we probably ran more cameras and had a little bit sense of better inventory, I think we'd probably realize that we see a lot of the same deer year after year. And I can't speak as much for the desert ranches, but you're probably getting bucks, 2-3 years in a row, and then all of a sudden, you'll end up killing one here 2 years from now that you're watching, you had pictures of last year, and that alone's pretty neat.
Right. I mean, I think 5 deer this year we have trail camera pictures. 5 deer that we killed this year, we've got trail camera pictures of them this year, last year, or both years.
That's awesome. That makes it a lot of fun. You almost start naming them, and then you build a history with them, regardless of size.
Sure.
You get some that you'll just like whatever's going on their head, and feel like I've got a good friend, Bill Winke. He lives in Iowa, and he's a big Midwestern whitetail hunter, and owns MidwesternWhitetail.com or MidwestWhitetail.com, and part of the joy of me watching his weekly webisode is the fact that he loves so much naming those deer and actually building a bond with those deer, and then trying to hunt specific deer, and it gives him a real sense of purpose. That's neat that's what you're doing. And you got anything else to add? I know we could talk. We'll probably end up doing some other podcasts on the same subject. But before we let this episode go, do you have anything else to add, or anything you want to ask of me?
I guess one of my biggest questions for you is, what percentage of the bucks and deer on your mountain ranches you feel like you're seeing year after year? Because for me, I feel like one of the biggest differences is that on the desert ranches, the deer don't move far. I mean, the deer that we saw last year are the same deer, even some of the does we recognize, and they are exactly the same deer. But on the mountain ranches, I have a theory that the deer travel further and move further and have a bigger home area.
Well, and I think part of that is, my idea with the desert floor is there's just a lot of things for the deer to eat, with all the different cactus, and all the succulents and all the stuff that they can eat are just right there.
Yes.
And so, I mean, they can live in a Palo Verde or a mesquite patch and have, cholla cactus all around them, or staghorn cholla, and where they don't have to move at all. And then I think sometimes these mountain ranches, I agree. I think the deer move quite a bit, but then I think you've got a big number of deer, so, I don't know that it's as easy to keep track of them. Right. I know we actually hunted a mountain ranch 3 years in a row. This was our 3rd year. And there was bucks. We had the first year there was, 3 or 4 or 5 bucks that, were probably 105 to 110-ish type bucks that we didn't shoot specifically because we were going to let them get bigger and shoot them the next year.
Yep.
And we came the second year, and, we killed a couple of deer that we had seen the year before, but we're like, where's the one with the drop tine? Where's the one with the fork G2? Where's the one? And so you wonder, are they changing their antler configuration? Have they moved? Did we not find them, or are they dead? And I don't know that I have an answer for you, but I can tell you, and then there were bucks in our second season that we thought for sure we were going to go down there this January and glass up in the same spot or on the same ridge. And I'm just going to tell you that wasn't our experience. Now, the ranch we've hunted the last 3 years, seems like our coyote population has gone up every year, and our deer numbers have gone down. And we have killed deer that we've seen the year before. But as a general rule of thumb, Dar and I were laughing this year. We were like, maybe we ought to shoot this deer, because if we come back next year, the way our odds have been, we're not going to see that deer again for whatever reason.
Right.
But I just feel like sometimes those desert ranches, I feel like they don't move as much, and, they may be a little bit more patternable.
Yeah, that's exactly the way I've observed things, and I just think on these desert ranches, these deer just don't move a whole lot at all. So.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, that leaves a lot of good topics for our next conversation. Tim, thanks so much for being with us. And, I know I've seen a few pictures. I think I saw pictures of your bucks, the drop tine buck, not this season, but last season.
Yep.
I don't know that I saw your pictures this year, but what might be kind of cool is if you send me a few pictures maybe of, regardless of size, pictures maybe of a trail camera pic, and then maybe the pic of them harvested from, a couple years back or whatever. Yep. And I'll put them on my website, and then when I do the conclusion of this episode, maybe I'll put the link, or in the text I'll link it. So I think it'd be kind of cool to see a few of the deer that you've been tracking, and then see the bucks harvested, and all sorts of topics for next discussion are, how the deer's characteristics change from year to year, and, how much did they get bigger? Did they stay the same? Age, what's the prime age for a, mature Coues buck? Is, at what point does he start going downhill? I mean, there's a lot of stuff for us to cover, and I appreciate you being with us today. And, one of the things we got going now is, the deer will be dropping their antlers, soon and next couple months. And it's always nice to be excited when the velvet's coming, and just wondering how your bucks are doing down there. And it creates a lot of optimism in us hunters. So I'm glad you were able to join us today, and it was a great conversation. And let's do it again.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Jay. I enjoyed it.
Sounds good, and we'll chat at you later.
Great, thank you.
Okay, take care, Tim.
Thanks for listening to the J. Scott Outdoors Western Big Game Hunting and Fishing Podcast, brought to you by GoHunt.com Insider. Research faster, hunt more. Go to GoHunt.com/insider and join today.